When looking at the wide array of video games that have come out over the years, we see a common, completely understandable trend. Video games tend to make the player the hero of the story, or at the very least they don't make you the main villain or source of evil within the world. The rare times in which the player is the main source of evil in the world, the game usually doesn't quite deliver on that sense of being the unstoppable boss monster that many players are hoping for. Today, I want to look into the ways that the gameplay of these villain protagonist games don't match up with the idea of being an unstoppable evil. So, let's start out by looking at some of the games that have you playing as an unstoppable bad guy. I'm going to focus on the games that are focused on making the fact that you're the villain a fun and enjoyable thing, not games that are trying to cause you to look at yourself and analyze things while making you realize that you are bad, like Undertale. I also want to stay away from games that have being bad as an option, like certain RPGs with branching choice mechanics and things like that. I want to look at games where you are bad and you enjoy being bad. I want to also look at how satisfying each game is when it comes to fulfilling that evil fantasy. With these guidelines established, let's start to look at some of the examples of games that make you evil. Let's start out with some of the asymmetric multiplayer games. There are games where one player is the quote-unquote bad guy controlling the dungeon or enemies while there are other players trying to survive, such as Dungeon Land. Dungeon Land is a fun little game where one person gets to feel the joy of throwing enemies at their friends and enjoy the struggle of these other people going against their obstacles, but never quite gets that feeling of being all-powerful right. Since if it did, then the other players playing the heroes wouldn't have any fun, leaving this game only somewhat satisfying for the villain complex. There are also multiplayer games like the Friday the 13th game that has one player as the villain, going around slaughtering each other, can once again be fun, but the satisfaction of the game seems to come just as much from the other players as the gameplay itself, and when viewed from a fantasy fulfillment perspective, there is still something missing due to the need for game balance. Multiplayer games seem to always fall just a little short of fulfilling those evil desires due to the restriction of making the game fun for all players. Moving on to single-player games, there are a few good examples here as well. Let's start out with a game like Dungeons 2, where you are literally the ultimate evil and are out to destroy the world. In this game, you are in charge of building your dungeon, building up an army, and attacking the surface world. This is about resource management and building units, as well as planning out your lair and planning a strategy for conquest. There's also a lot of humor thrown into this game, which keep things fun while also serving to remind you about how evil and all-powerful you are. Humor seems to be a common string that allows the player to feel like they are the bad guy while also feeling good about being bad. This game never really makes you feel completely overpowered or unstoppable, but it does satisfy that strategic evil general desire quite nicely. Party Hard is a game that also scratches that strategy element of being evil while having a little more action focus than Dungeons 2. Party Hard focuses on mass murdering everyone at a party, but since your character is so easily caught or murdered by the police, it never makes you feel like that all-powerful villain character, but instead just a bad guy. Now, one of the main games people think of when they think of a game where you are the main villain of the game is the Overlord series. In this game, you are the Overlord, leading his army of minions into battle to conquer the world and bend it to your will. This is another game with an emphasis on dark humor to lighten the evil tension. The gameplay itself is similar to Pikmin in the sense that you have an army of minions with various abilities following you around, obeying your orders, but this does have more of an emphasis on combat, and the Overlord himself is a lot more active in that combat than Captain Olimar is in the Pikmin games. Overall, the story, the commanding of hordes of evil minions, and the revisiting of conquered areas and giving orders can be very satisfying, and out of all the games I've listed here, I personally think this is the closest to fulfilling the unstoppable evil fantasy. With that said, the game still doesn't perfectly hit that mark of being the ultimate evil, due to things like having to fight bosses, which makes your Overlord seem less impressive when there are individuals who could easily win one-on-one against you, as well as the fact that there is never that feeling of being truly unstoppable. There's always that chance that you will be beaten. Now, you may have caught on by now that one of the main things I feel is necessary to fulfilling the desire of being the ultimate evil is focused on the power fantasy. I believe that a lot of games that aim to allow the player to be evil have the problem of not focusing on the power fantasy of the player, and that need to feel all-powerful, unstoppable, and like the player is something that needs to be feared by everything else in this world. All the games I listed above are games I love for various reasons and think they all do a good job in some way to capture the power fantasy and allow the player to have fun being evil, but none perfectly get that feeling of being evil. Oddly enough, there is one game that I played that really made me feel like the unstoppable evil that is feared by all and where I could destroy any who opposed me. This game, oddly enough, was about fighting against the ultimate evil though. That game is Shadow of Mordor. Never before in a game had I experienced the enemies talk about my name in fear while I picked them off one by one or bent them to my will, forcing them to fight for me. I was able to take advantage of their various fears in combat, all while dismantling their world. Add on top of that, being able to order the orcs that had been bent to my will, leading to that extra commanding power fantasy, and I felt truly unstoppable. There was even a story element to me feeling powerful, since they made it clear that I was unkillable. Even when you die in Shadow of Mordor, your character just returns, sowing even more fear amongst your enemies as they talk about how you return from the dead. Looking into the future, I believe anyone wanting to design a game where the player is the villain, they need to look towards the way Shadow of Mordor handles the fear aspect of the enemies, since that seems to be the main missing element in a lot of the other games that have tried to allow players to itch that evil urge that they have. That's just my opinion though, so let me know what you think in the comments below. I would love to hear what you think makes a really good villain game, and if you have any recommendations for games, well, I'm more than happy to hear about them. I always loved playing a game where I get to be the bad guy. If you want to see more of my videos, check out my channel and subscribe. Otherwise, I'll see you guys all later.